Okay. First of all, thanks for watching, and I'm just gonna keep talking on unless there's kind of something in the chat that kind of says that something's wrong with the sound or the quality. But definitely 5 by 5 would be pretty good. So besides that, yeah, let's get into it. So um, basically, I've wanted to. Well, I've tried to kind of put together and record and make a video on the previous kind of events that have happened over the past month or so, but like things have been changing so quickly that I've kind of been finding myself like recording it over and over and over again, and it's just not working. So I'm just gonna kind of go through it now. I want to talk about what the government is kind of doing right now, how they're responding to certain events, and how I think they're going to respond to certain events and how they're kind of marketing this to the normal kind of average Irish person. So with that, yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do, and I want to kind of layer this down because I'm going to start bringing in points on top of this, is basically, I think one of the kind of interesting things with what's going on is the response that different people among different areas of society kind of have to the whole Wu thing. Whether it's the kind of middle class or working class or older people or younger people, and in general, a good kind of heuristic for that um, is essentially how much do you have to lose in terms of the virus. So, for example, I've talked about this before. If you're a middle class civil servant, your job is secure, then you're going to be more for the lockdown, for the rules that they brought in, all the restrictions and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're kind of maybe working in the private sector more, you're going to be more against what's going on. If you're older, you're going to be more for the restrictions. If you're younger, you're going to be less so, and so on and so on. The more you have to lose, the more you're for the lockdown, for the virus, or for the effects to combat it, or whatever you want to call it. Sorry, I got that mixed up. So the more that you have to lose, the more you're kind of just against these lockdowns and all that kind of thing. And the less you have to lose, the less you're against it and all that kind of thing. And I think this is kind of an important point or an important kind of thing to talk about, because of the fact that, like, if you take a look at, say, the middle class, right? One of the things with a lot of middle class people is that they tend to get really, really invested on, or they really kind of show off in terms of maybe status, in terms of the ideas that they hold, that they want to have the acceptable opinions, they want to have the right opinions, they want to be in have the right opinions on the right TV shows, the right books, all that kind of thing. And one of the things with this whole kind of virus Wu flu thing, I think, is that a lot of people have become very, very emotionally invested in their opinions on the virus. So like like, in other words, that, like, it's intelligent or it's smart to have the right opinions about the virus, that, like, that the lockdown worked, that we're taking the right measures, all that kind of thing. So on one hand, you've got a lot of people who are just very, very intellectually invested in this thing, but on the other hand, a lot of people are invested in this because I think, to a certain degree, is that, like, if you're, say, kind of an average guy working kind of an average job, and maybe your life is a little bit boring or whatever, and then suddenly this big virus comes along, and then suddenly you're kind of like, things are a little bit more exciting, and your walk to the Tesco is not just a walk to a Tesco anymore. It's you wearing a face mask, trying to save other people's lives. It's kind of like a lot. There is kind of a psychological aspect to it, where people are kind of not just intellectually invested in it, but kind of from a kind of a you know makes their life more exciting um, point of view. So I remember I was talking to a friend of a buddy of mine, and he had this. I haven't tried this out, but it's kind of an interesting thing. And he called it the kind of COVID flag test. And the COVID flag test is basically you say something if you want to find out someone's opinion quickly about the virus. You basically say something that's kind of a little bit kind of ridiculous, and you kind of see how they respond to it. So he said like he was kind of just kind of winding people up by going around saying stuff like, "Did you know that the government are hiding thousands and thousands of bodies in a in a shed somewhere because of the virus to make sure people don't freak out?" And kind of people who are more against the virus be like, that's ridiculous. But people who kind of love or kind of like the drama or like being scared, they're kind of like, oh god, oh god, oh god. They like on Facebook or whatever. Like it's a very interesting phenomenon. But between all that, there's all these kind of like emotional investments kind of going on, and it's coming mainly, or a big chunk of it is coming from the middle class, because like the fact that the middle class would be more on kind of jobs where you can work from home, excuse me, and they haven't kind of suffered as much yet, maybe in terms of kind of economy and this, that, and the other. They're kind of like, and again with the whole kind of intellectual investment thing, they're kind of more addicted to, or they kind of have more of an emotional investment in what is going on. So I think that's important because that wraps into what's going on with the government right now. And I think what's happened, roughly speaking, since the start, I mean, there's a lot of theories on what happened. Like, was this a bioweapon? Was this, did this just come out of nowhere, or this, that, and the other? And people like Dave Cullen have talked about extremely well, in my opinion. All this stuff like the fourth industrial revolution and the Great Reset and all that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of more interested in it on a kind of a local Irish civil servant, politician level. And on that level, I think what's going on, or what's happened, is, roughly speaking, this is the timeline. So you have this pandemic thing spreading around, this, that, and the other. And if you take a look at a lot of the earlier interviews, with Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar and Simon Coveney, there's this kind of thing of like, and people are asking like, are you going to do something? Are you going to do something? And the response is always the same. It's something like, well, EU policy or WHO policy says that we should not do this, and we're just waiting on the expert opinion and the right opinion to come in. So what we've essentially done is, I mean, this is what the Irish government have done for a long time, is that we essentially parrot, or we just get told what to do by the European Union, essentially. And so what happened is we did that to kind of extent that was too late or whatever. The lockdown didn't work. And at the start of that, what happened was Fine Gael especially got an increase in poll support, and they got an increase from the fact that like you had this kind of 50 to 70-year-old kind of baby boomer kind of really scared that they're going to die, and the government were playing a blinder and all that kind of stuff. So they got a bit of an increase in the polls at the start, and for a lot of people, like the whole novelty of like I don't have to go to work anymore, and I'm just sitting at home watching Netflix and eating takeaways and all that kind of stuff. There's a bit of a novelty. So at the start, for a lot of the civil servants, for a lot of the politicians and whatnot, this is kind of this is kind of an interesting kind of, or good thing. And plus, they also got all this additional power and additional control over people. But what's happened is, because like I said, we tend to base our decisions on Europe and on the United Nations and this, that, and the W Health Organization, this, that, and the other, because we kept parroting them and what they're saying. You started to kind of see cracks, and you started to see cracks in terms of like, well, I mean, one of them is economically. I mean, the economy is still essentially shut down, and that has turned into them starting to realize that this is going very, very wrong very, very quickly. And people, more and more people are starting to kind of go, what the hell is going on? And so what's going on right now is to some degree, it's kind of like, you've got these PR guys kind of coming in and, saying this, that, and the other. To some degree, it's a sort of a collective unconscious thing. But right now, you've got this big regime of kind of journalists, civil servants, politicians trying to protect their jobs. And you've also got, and that's kind of built up a little bit by the fact that, like I said before, the middle class have, or on average, the middle class have a much more kind of emotional investment in this and a kind of an intellectual investment in this. So linking that back forward, they're starting to worry, and you can see this in the way that they're transitioning in the way they're kind of talking about things. So when this was kind of starting off, it was basically like this is a really, really scary thing because of the deaths or whatever. And then it moved to cases, right? And then it moved to cases. And now, if you take a look at kind of papers or a lot of journalists, they're not just talking about cases anymore. They're talking about, like, they're using these phrases like 14-day cumulative case rate, and all that is you add up the past 14 days of cases and then you divide by, so Ireland's population is what, around 5 million. So to get 100,000, you divide that by 50, and then you get your cases per 100,000. That's all that is, like it, and then it's kind of used with, or we're worse than Italy and we're worse than Spain and all this kind of stuff, And then the second thing that's going on is that, and I've kind of seen this, like, again, with people who are maybe more emotionally invested in this thing, like, so you might, like, one thing I've kind of found is, like, when I kind of try and talk about this, if you kind of go on and do something like, if you kind of phrase it like, oh, scamdemic, if you kind of phrase it like that, people are obviously just going to go, what the fuck are you talking about? Why are you talking like that? But if you kind of go like, I think it's kind of odd that we have a lockdown and there's only been 4 recorded deaths in the whole of August. An increasingly common response is, yeah, but I heard of this story of a 25-year-old prime of his kind of life football player, athlete kind of guy, and he got it and he was destroyed for 6 months. That's what it's kind of turning into now. It's getting more and more and more. It's the equivalent of someone getting addicted to a drug and they need kind of more and more of it to kind of get the same hit. Like, it's gone from deaths to cases to using kind of obfuscating things with, like, 14-day, cumulative rate to these kind of stories. And it's just kind of interesting how that is kind of playing out. And this is where their response comes in, because another kind of variable or another kind of couple of components that come into this is Sweden. Because, I mean, like I was kind of saying before in that last stream, and people like Ivor Cummins and this, that, and the other have kind of said before, like Sweden's 14-day cumulative. Oh, I'll talk about the cases a bit more as well. But Sweden's 14-day cumulative rate of cases is now lower than us, and in a lot of ways they're doing a lot better than us, and they've had virtually no lockdown. So between all of these things kind of floating around, like, and people know people in Sweden and this, that, and the other, it's becoming increasingly apparent that the lockdown just did not work under any stretch. And that leaves the government and that leaves a lot of these politicians with a problem, because they've essentially kind of maybe two options, right? And those two options, well, not necessarily two options, but kind of on an extreme, think of it as a distribution or think of it as a spectrum, right? One of the options is you go and say, we were wrong, lockdown didn't work, herd immunity was the way to go, Sweden was right, right? If you do that, right, you will absolutely destroy people's faith in the government, in the civil service, all this kind of stuff. And because of the fact that, like I said before, the middle class and a lot of these people are very, very emotionally invested in being right and having the right opinion and being, socially accepted and all that kind of stuff. If you were to tell them, yeah, that kind of thing that you were intellectually invested in for the past few months, yeah, you were completely wrong. That would absolutely just really just aggravate and piss off a lot of kind of people like that, and your voting base would would essentially collapse. And you can kind of see that they're doing this a little bit. Like, I mean, there's a news talk radio thing where, like they're testing the waters a bit, like, Professor Luke O'Neill talking about the PCR tests. And I'll get back to the PCR test in a bit, because I the funny thing with I did a video, yeah, what people's fate in the civil service. Yeah, okay, fair point. But like, the last video I did, Sweden was right, Ireland was wrong. I was talking about the fact that, like, because of Bayes' theorem, about 50% of the cases could be false positives, and I forgot to I should have maybe emphasized a bit more. That's kind of a random sample, so maybe the numbers are a bit better. But you know, there is a New York Times article talking about the fact that, like, these PCR tests are, depending on the cycles that are done to kind of test for the presence of coronavirus RNA in someone's system, um, you could have like tiny, tiny fucking fragments of this, but the person is not even remotely contagious to other people. And there are estimates whereby, like, this is a case for about 90% of um 90% of cases. So, like, my kind of estimation that like half the cases might be nonsense. That might be a massively, massively um generous kind of opinion. And even just to add on top of that, when you combine that with Bayes' theorem, and you kind of punch into the numbers, you can get, like, we could honestly be talking about like only 5% of the cases are actually maybe valid. And even just to kind of stretch that out even further, um, basically, I mean, and this is what's happening. This is why you're seeing a spike in cases in the past while, um, because of the fact that, like, people are going in, and now we're entering flu season. This is why I kind of titled this "Winter is Coming," because we're entering flu season, and people are kind of maybe to some degree primed to kind of freak out about this, and there's more and more testing. You're going to get more and more false positives, and people are going to go, "Oh God, we need to, we're heading back into kind of, you know, the bad time, and we need to do this, that, and the other." But um, so that's kind of a little bit of a thing there. So um, it's RNA produced. Yeah, I mean that as well. Like, yeah, but I mean, like, if we, even just assuming, right? Even just assuming, because I've heard that matter. Yeah, great point. Even just assuming, like, it was just like, say, coronavirus RNA. Like, if we had journalists, like if we had actual proper journalists, like, one of the things I'd be very interested to know is that, like, so you've got different cycles, right, to test for RNA because of this PCR test, and the more cycles that are undertaken in the test, the more uh, that the test is able to pick up um, very, very small amounts of RNA, and it becomes more sensitive. So if you want to have a more conclusive result, you reduce the amount of cycles in the test, right? So my question would be that, like, especially now, because, for example, like, if you take a look at the cases per county, Leitrim has had like virtually no cases. So my question would be, is the testing consistent for PCRs across all counties, right? Because then, I mean, even on top of the PCR stuff, Bayes' theorem, how actual effective or bad this virus is, you end up getting to the question is, are the lockdowns actually justified? Because you might actually be basing them on different RNA cycles. But again, I don't see anyone, I don't see any kind of journalist talking about that, which is a bit kind of concerning. So that's the thing. So when you kind of wrap that around, that's kind of one option that they have. Leech was the lowest population, yeah, but like they've had no cases, and even if you adjust for cases per population, they still have had nothing. Like, but my point essentially is that like, is the testing framework consistent across every single county? Because if not, you might have one county which might have an artificially high level of cases because of the structure of the PCR test, because of the number of cycles that they're using. And if they're going, oh, we need this 5-colored system and we need to lock down certain counties, well, how do we know that that system is not consistent? That system might not be consistent, and certain counties might just have a higher probability of entering the lockdown because of nothing else really, just the amount of cycles that are being used. So so if they kind of go like, I mean, like they haven't kind of doing the kind of like testing the water stuff. Varadkar is also on News Talk, and he also talked about the fact that like herd immunity is, that there's potential for that to be true. So they're kind of testing the waters with this, but if they kind of went out and out and said it, they would be, they'd be in huge trouble. Like, they'd be in huge trouble. So what's the other extreme option? The other extreme option then is to just go, right, we're just kind of locking down everything, and we're just going to wait until a vaccine. If you have all this group of people and they want to kind of protect their jobs, the kind of one of the main ways out for them is that they keep things kind of going fairly to some degree, and then lock down to some degree because we're protecting you against the evil virus. And then vaccine comes, people get vaccinated, and then it's like, see, you might have had the economy destroyed, but we saved all your lives. Look how we played a blinder. But of course, I mean, like I was talking about in that last stream, the second wave one, uh, there's only so long you can keep your economy locked down, and there's only so much money you can borrow, and eventually you end up at the stage whereby your economy collapses. And whatever about a group of pissed off people because you told them herd immunity was bullshit, and they're going to go, nah, well, fuck you. Herd immunity is bullshit, or herd immunity is not bullshit because I've been emotionally invested in this thing. Then imagine when they don't have jobs anymore. And there are a lot of people who I could see like just never, working again after this. Like the economic, there is an economic just disaster just coming down the line. So if they could do that, they kind of risk even more of a kind of a backlash towards them, and you've got civil unrest and this, that, and the other. So the next option then is to frame it in a certain way so that kind of people will become more accepting of it. And I think what they're trying to do is they're going to try and go down the more extreme lockdown kind of route. And I think I talked about this a few months ago about, in a video called What Happens Now, I was talking about the fact that like we're going to have one of the longest, most severe lockdowns because the Irish love being told what to do. The Irish love being told by the European Union what to do. And that seems to be happening. We're the only country which doesn't have the pubs open, or this awful. Actually, let me just have a brief digression. Have you kind of noticed like these kind of phrases more and more cropping up? Like, this week is crucial, or this is a critical. The next few days will be critical. This kind of phrasing again and again and again, and also this, like, people talking about like bars, like, or pubs, and they're talking about them as wet bars or wet pubs, and maybe I'm being a little bit conspiratorial, but some of it kind of smells like some PR company came up with the phrase wet bars, because when I was kind of when I heard the phrase wet bars for the first time, I kind of almost went, well, what's kind of a word association with that? Wet bars, wet markets. Where did this virus was said to come from? Wet markets, that kind of word association. Maybe it's just a bit of a coincidence, but it's something that's a bit kind of off for me. So yeah, how do they get out of this, or how do they think that they're going to get out of this? Well, there's a few different ways. One of them is that they're going to look for a kind of a sort of a kind of a contrast effect, right? And what I mean by a contrast effect, it's kind of maybe it's used a bit in sales as well. And what the contrast kind of effect is, or I'm not sure if there's an exact name for it, but it's basically you end up saying something like, this is going to be the worst thing ever. This is going to be the worst thing ever. We're going to have a second lockdown. We're going to have a second lockdown. It's going to be awful. This, that, and the other. And people go, oh no, this is awful. And then a couple of days ago, kind of out of random, I'm working, and then I get a message from someone kind of working with me. He's kind of like, hey, LTG, did you hear that they're opening the pubs in about a week? Just kind of half out of nowhere, and through that day, people were in a kind of a noticeably better mood. So it's kind of like, if you bid something up, or some horrible event, if you dial something up to 10 or 11, and then you bring it back down to a 7 or an 8, people are much more willing to accept it. And I think that's been kind of going out as well, because I've been kind of, the way they kind of announced the pubs has been weird, or it just kind of came out of nowhere. It came, it didn't kind of flow kind of naturally. And I was thinking like they're kind of maybe either using it for this, but then it even contradicts other stuff. So for example, Yoan, the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, brought in those laws about, like, organized amounts of people and groups of people meeting up. So they bring in a law to stop you from groups of people meeting up. Then they go, well, groups of people can meet up more, and you get some drinks in, and more people would meet up. That doesn't really make sense. And so I think that they, because I maybe someone in the chat can tell me, but like, there is this kind of PR marketing communications guy our marketing guy that was hired by Varadkar to advise him on when he was Taoiseach and through this whole campaign. So I could see that some of these kind of things that were kind of going forward. And the second one, it does feel like they're using the pubs in some way. And then the second way is that, and this is where I'm potentially going to sound like, I might sound like I'm shitting on it, but I'm actually not like it. But there are a number of protests organized for this Saturday. And based on the last one outside the Customs House, there were words like, far right, Gemma O'Doherty once again being used as a kind of person to scare away, normal people. Yeah, Chris something. Yeah, Chris certainly does ring a bell. But they were kind of using that, and my kind of worry is that, like, what's going to happen is, by the way, I fully support the protest. By the way, it's just kind of a normal thing in that way, protesting. But like, that it's going to be used as, you end up a few days later with basically the government going, well, you've had a big pile of people, and they were literally talking about this on the news today, that Dublin has had a big surge of community transmission, and they might not be able to open the pubs. Then at the weekend you end up with a protest, and then they go, well, you've had thousands of people turn up and Dublin is at a tipping point, we're going to shut down the pubs again, and especially in Dublin. And then the idea of that will be to alienate people further from being anti-lockdown. So I have a bit of a suspicion that they might be using the pubs for this kind of marketing framing, or if they're not, they're going to use it further and further down the line. So there's kind of a couple of things like that going on. Um, so yeah, right. John Concannon. Actually, let me just type uh, that name in, because it is kind of starting to bug me a little bit. Who is the name of that guy? Yeah, that's it. Wolf Found is correct. Yeah, John Concannon. Yeah, that's the guy. So that's the um that's the kind of next component to that. And people might be saying, like, well, Black Lives Matter, you had those kind of protests and all that kind of stuff. But that's not going to matter. That's not going to convince people. Um, if it's going to put out in the Irish Times, if it's put out in RTE and this, that, and the other, that's the whole. And, like, there is no statistical relationship between the Black Lives Matter and cases, during the summer. Uh, but that's not ultimately going to matter. So that's the first kind of set of points I wanted to talk about, and the second set of points I wanted to talk about there. Um, so I suppose, like, a lot of you have been watching people like um, people like Dave and people like Thomas Sheridan, right? And their opinion is kind of more that, like, this is sort of a you know we're in a very anti-lockdown. People are in a very small percentage of the population, and I disagree with them, and I think a lot more people are anti-lockdown than you would think. Just from talking to people, but also I want to talk a little bit about, because I think he's interesting in a lot of ways. Like, maybe not in terms of, like, agreeing with his opinion or not. I mean, he seems grand and all that, but Niall Boylan, right? And Niall Boylan is interesting because you have to ask yourself, um, because Niall Boylan has been completely anti-lockdown for the past while, and you have to ask yourself, like, in a sense, like, why is Niall Boylan popular, and why is Niall Boylan like this? He gets a lot of views in terms of radioship, and he's able to beat out a lot of these kind of RT channels, and and all that in terms of kind of listenership figures. And why is that? Well, he appeals to people. And why does Boylan appeal to people? Boylan appeals to people because, roughly speaking, he has the political opinions of the average Irish person. And if you've been listening to Niall Boylan show, kind of just over the past while, like, it's been call-ins and call-ins of people just absolutely fuming over this thing. So, you know, roughly speaking, like, Boylan, as whatever Boylan's opinions are on a topic, that's a good proxy for the average opinion of the average Irish person. And if Boylan is kind of talking about this, especially with the listenership figures and the viewership, the listenership figures that he has, a lot more people are hearing kind of anti kind of lockdown stuff. Um, and a lot more people are just actively kind of against, what's going on. So, when I kind of hear those kind of videos or opinions, I'm not necessarily sure I agree. Even kind of talking to people in kind of day-to-day life, because I know, like, I talked about kind of a lot of people having an intellectual kind of investment uh, with all of this. But one of the things as well is that, like, like, you know, just when you kind of see people, like, wearing masks or whatever, like, a lot of people are kind of doing that because, they just want to go along to get along, and, they just want to go and buy their stuff and buy some stuff and get out. they don't want to cause any kind of hassle or this, that, and the other. And the other thing too is that like it's kind of turned into some bit of a kind of a controversial topic to talk about, because if you kind of phrase it the wrong way, like it turns into a, and because people are kind of emotionally invested in it, uh, you end up with like maybe someone worried that like someone turns to them and go like, do you not care if my granny dies, or you know this, that, and the other. So yeah, there's a bit of that going on. Like, I mean, it may not feel like it, but there are a lot more people that are against this or disagree with what's going on than you might think. So, and finally, that kind of wraps into uh, maybe just two more points I kind of just want to make there quickly. The first point I just want to make is there's a couple of interesting similarities, I think, between this, between what's going on right now and between what happened in 2007, 2008. And one of the interesting things, and by the way, I should have mentioned this before, when I was kind of saying that the government are going to go more the lockdown than the herd immunity because of all those kind of reasons I listed off earlier, but they're kind of going to try and spin it in a certain way. Well, this is kind of maybe another kind of backup for that. Why? But the thing that kind of backs that up, or the similarities between 2007, 2008, which I found interesting in that, is that like in 2007, 2008, you had all these journalists going, buy, 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 the boom's getting boomier, look at this fine property and look at how much you can kind of loan out. And also in 2008, you had the vast, vast majority of academia and academic economists saying, we're going to have a soft landing, or, stop scaremongering. You had all these kind of economists and all that kind of stuff. And with the exception of a couple of people, I think like Morgan Kelly and um, I think, well, I'm kind of reluctant to say David McWilliams a little bit, because, David McWilliams has done a bit of, damage himself, I suppose. But basically the vast, vast majority of academia did not see it coming, and they were completely wrong. And or even like if you've seen that movie, the Big Short, the vast, vast majority of quant guys, the whole mortgage security thing, didn't see it coming, and only a kind of a handful of kind of just random kind of outside guys. Yeah, he did, but he did call it in 2008. But he, I'll talk about this in another stream. But McWilliams is, this kind of neo-Keynesian kind of guy, and wonder, like the whole thing about him kind of Brian Lenihan going to his house and all that kind of stuff, trying to get tips on how to deal with what's going on. McWilliams, I'm really making a video. Yeah, like, look, McWilliams doesn't understand debt. He doesn't understand private debt, and he doesn't understand. Like he's been saying all this stuff about like helicopter money in relation to what's going on over the past couple of months, like, and a lot, to some degree, as far as I kind of know, like um, a lot of yeah, helicopter money. Yeah, I like. Anyway, I'm kind of going off the point. I'll get back to McWilliams in a bit, but like, or even something like if you go back to maybe Donald Trump, like in 2016, like the vast majority of these kind of, again, journalists and again political scientists kind of types, they didn't predict it, like they didn't see it coming, and now we're in 2020, and you've got all these journalists kind of saying, you know, the new normal, this is the worst thing, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got all these kind of epidemiologists and this, that, and the other saying, we need to lock everything down. We need to lock everything down. And so that's kind of happening again. And it's kind of a case of why that's happening. And I think a lot of the case, like, in academia, and, you know, uh, Edward Dutton, if you has done a couple of videos on this, is that like, um, you're kind of, I suppose, kind of genius, highly creative type. Those people get chased out of academia, and there's this real kind of like rather than kind of going after the truth, there's a real kind of you know going after like credentialism or bits of paper, or having or rather than having a theory that kind of correctly describes what's going on, you have a kind of a new theory or a complicated theory or a trending kind of new sophisticated theory. People like Nassim Taleb have kind of talked about this in a certain way, like um, the fact that like a few decades ago, like if a kid in the community got measles, it'll be like, oh well, let's get them infected, and they build up an immunity and they get it early on, they're good to go. That like people then kind of knew something like herd immunity, um, and so rather than these kind of more kind of normal, maybe boring in a sense, but true theories, there's this kind of look towards kind of more sophisticated, cutting edgy, and you see this in a lot of fields. Like you see it in physics with dark matter, you see it in the role of debt in economics, private debt, and because again, Taleb has talked about this whole thing of like IYIs, and like when these people kind of screw up, they're often not kind of held accountable for the mistakes. Well, what happens when you give academics and you put them in NEFIT, and their theories are based on these kind of theories of kind of fitting in, kind of high agree with people, as someone there mentioned in the chat, and you're kind of more genius, kind of creative types who should be kind of maybe making these decisions are not there. And because the other thing too is that, again, kind of back to the emotionally invested or kind of intellectually invested in the theory, if you give these people power um, to test their theories and there's no kind of repercussions for that, then they're just going to kind of increasingly double down and double down and double down. And this is where, and like, for them to, for a lot of people to just say you're kind of wrong on something, like, oh, I'm wrong. I got this wrong. I got that wrong. That, I mean, for most people, like, oh, yeah, I made a mistake, But if you're kind of an academic and you're supposed to be an expert in your field, for someone in NEFIT to just admit that they're wrong, it would destroy them emotionally. Like, so they're just going to keep doubling down on this. And in addition to that, and I'm finally kind of just looping this back to the government. I'm just kind of looping this back to the government response. Uh, Basically, they would like, or they would like to be in a position whereby they can say, they can either justify having the kind of harder lockdown, but also they can go and say two things. They can also go and say, well, we're just politicians and we just took advice from NEFIT. And then the second thing that they can say is, well, NEFIT wanted back to the contrast effect I was talking about before. NEFIT wanted an absolutely crazy, crazy lockdown, and we just went for a crazy lockdown. Look how good we are. So they're kind of using NEFIT in that way as well. So when you combine all that, and when you combine the stuff that, like I said in the second wave video, that seems to be playing out, the increased number of cases, the deflationary spiral. Oh yeah, that's actually happening right now. Government announced a 2 billion guarantee for loans to small businesses about 3 days ago. So that's starting to happen here as well. And so when you build that up, yeah, it's not it's kind of looking a little bit, well, there's a good few things to be positive about, and And yeah, coming up for says the budget will finish the government. Well, it's not going to be pretty anyway, and there's going to be a lot of it's going to be a lot of high taxes anyway. And I'll probably I'll see if I can maybe do a video on the amount of debt in the Irish economy, but it's pretty it's total debt is about like 750 billion, so it's not kind of looking great either way. Um, Finally, oh yeah, I just want to talk about one more thing, and we're coming up to about 50 minutes, so I'll I'll probably end it there. One interesting thing I've noticed is between kind of an interesting kind of contrasting effect is between kind of younger people, kind of millennials and Zoomers, to use the American phrases, and boomers, right? And one of the things, the papers and the news have been kind of talking about, like, young people meeting up and young people having parties and young people kind of spreading the kind of infection and all that kind of stuff. Um, I remember just a few days ago, I was talking to a kind of an older, kind of 60-year-old uh, woman. It's kind of a casual thing in the area, and she was kind of saying, like, do you know what I saw today? I was like, what did you say today? I saw these young teenagers all, pushed together, and they're not wearing masks, and they're not social distancing, and it's just a bunch of teenagers just like, being teenagers or hanging out, but it, it's turned into like this thing, um, where this big kind of like, because they're kind of meeting up, like, it's this big kind of, oh, I'm going to get infected, I'm going to get messed up by the virus. And one of the things as well is that, like, when I've kind of heard this kind of contrasting kind of complaining about the other. So um I've heard from a kind of a couple of younger people that, they're kind of older parents are kind of going, like, why you why are you doing this? I don't want to get the thing, you know and then kind of older people are being told by younger people, why are you supporting this? I don't have a job anymore. um my education's gone. There's this kind of contrasting effect, and I can predict that causing a bit of a schism between kind of younger people and older people. I mean, I talked about that before, but it's getting more and more pronounced. And it's kind of like obviously I'm talking about a kind of an on average thing, but like, you know, I remember mentioning this to someone, and they kind of said, "Oh yeah, well that's when half my friends left Australia in 2010, 2011, when we kind of brought it up, they just went, yeah, it happens." And then they just said they're seeing the same trend, in 2020, well, this lockdown is, destroying people's lives economically. Uh, well, it happens. So I think that might be causing, yeah, a bit of a split and a bit of a schism between kind of older people and younger people. So one more thing, the economy front over the next 24 months, look for the US attack tax. That's, yeah, yeah. And actually, that's another thing as well. That's going to eat into, that's potentially going to eat into a lot of our corporate tax receipts. But also, actually, I just want to cheers for that, actually, Patrick, because you reminded me just of a point I just wanted to talk about in relation to Trump. Because I mean, I've been talking about this for months that Trump is going to win, but that's becoming increasingly likely. And if Trump was to win, a number of effects. 80% of corporate tax take is from MNCs. Um, Actually, off the top of your head, you wouldn't know, like, how much of that percentage Google is paying or Facebook is paying, would you? I mean, it's probably just an off the top question, but um, as a Zoomer, most girls have retweeted or posted wear a mask. Yeah, I mean, people are like, you go on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, people, especially women, like you see these kind of like designer almost kind of face masks, and it is kind of a thing, like, I've kind of seen it before whereby, like, they'll, I remember going to the shop and I remember just like a bunch of kind of younger women just like taking pictures with kind of with the mask, and then just taking it off straight away and then just walking along with each other, But um, just kind of back in relation to Trump, if uh, if Trump wins, yeah, landslide. I think it's going to be a landslide as well. Um, a number of things are going to happen. Uh, First one is you're probably going to see increased rioting going in America, in the US, especially in some of the blue states. And then the second thing you're going to see is that the Irish kind of system is going to melt down completely, and they are going to become very, very demotivated. And what I could see happen is that because of the riots and because of the motivation, and they're going to go, um, well, look what bad Orange Man did. Riots going on in America. We cannot be like Orange Man. Therefore, we need to deal with any anti-lockdown sentiment because we're obviously doing the right thing because Orange Man did not do the right thing. And we also need to deal with the through increased hate speech laws, we need to deal with the quote unquote far right, because if we don't do that, we get Orange Man and things go bad here. And that'll be kind of how they push through that, or how they um move forward with that. So I see 110% returns. Yeah, that's interesting. I do know that Biden and Trump, last time I checked, are completely evens in terms of odds, whereas that wasn't the case at all. This compared to in 2016 with Hillary, and even like the Democrats seem to be making a bunch of like some of the same weird mistakes or errors. Like they're not, they're not doing much activity in terms of Michigan, for example, and I don't like. There's a few things I can kind of talk about in relation to that, but it's. I think we're 52 minutes in, and maybe this is kind of maybe gone on long enough. So yeah, cheers. Thank you for listening. Just before I go, um, I just want to recommend something there quickly. So if you bear with me for 5 seconds, I'll get it for you now. Where is it? Sorry, lads. 1 second now. Yes, okay. There's a channel I wanted to recommend, and it just went out of my head there for 5 seconds. The channel is called oh fucking hell, I forgot it again. Time for Change. Time for Change. It's a channel that's been doing these kind of memey kind of videos, but they're actually, some of them are actually very, very good. So yeah, I just wanted to just recommend that channel there. Besides that, I don't really think I have anything else to say. So with that, yeah, yeah, it's 11:10. So have a good one. Good night, and I will speak to you later on. Bye. 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 Bye.